At the Nuremberg trials, one important defendant was missing. During the war, millions of people around the world dreamed of seeing him hanged. That man was Hitler. Getting to the person who started World War II was a goal, shared by both politicians in their offices and ordinary soldiers in the trenches. It seemed like this would be the first thing done after victory, but the Führer of the Third Reich managed to slip away. According to the official version, he committed suicide. Unofficially, he escaped to South America, like many other high-ranking Nazis. On April 30th, 1945, Russian troops had already entered Berlin and were assaulting the Reichstag. Hitler knew it was over. He had already written his will. He knew that the mutilated bodies of his ally Mussolini and his lover had been hung up in a square by partisans, both hung by their feet. Of course, Hitler understood that he was about to face a similar fate, or worse. He wanted to end his life on his own terms. His last refuge, the so-called Führer bunker, was a complex of underground structures in the Reich Chancellery Garden, 5 meters deep. The Nazi elite had been hiding there for 4 months. Hitler was accompanied by Eva Braun, his lover, on April 29th. He finally married her, and on April 30th at 2:30 p.m., they locked themselves in a room in the bunker. A short time later, a personal attendant found them dead. Hitler and Eva Braun in the bunker. The official timeline of events before and after Hitler's suicide is established down to the minute, with testimony from participants and witnesses. Hitler's adjutant helped the attendant carry the bodies into the garden, where they were doused with gasoline and set on fire. The first attempt to burn the bodies failed, so they brought a torch made from some old papers and documents. Shells were falling nearby. The remains were placed in a shell crater. Strange inconsistencies in the investigation, and covered with earth. Later, the remains of 2 dogs were found there, German shepherds, poisoned and laid beside their master. What happened next is known from Soviet documents, declassified in 1980. On May 2nd, Soviet troops captured the Reich Chancellery and the bunker. Blood was found on the sofa in Hitler's office, and a few days later, unidentified remains were dug up from the crater. These were sent for examination, and through fragments of jaws and skulls, the identities were confirmed as Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. But then, something strange began. The remains were reburied several times and eventually completely destroyed, leaving only a fragment of the skull with a bullet hole and a jawbone. The jaw is believed to be in the FSB archives, while the skull fragment with the bullet hole is in the State Archive. The secrecy surrounding all this gave the Americans reason for doubt. Some researchers believe that the Soviet Commission never found any bodies, and that the story of the autopsy and reburials was just disinformation. Of course, such a story couldn't avoid sparking conspiracy theories. No body, no case, as we say in Russia. Another point is that the jaw was authenticated, first by Hitler's dentist assistant and then by his dental technician. French forensic experts finally settled the matter in 2018 by comparing the jaw with Hitler's 1944 X-rays. As for the skull, there is much speculation. Around it, it's said that the frontal bone is too thin for an adult male. So either Hitler was a woman under 40 or the skull isn't his. Overall, the trivial nature of death of such a significant historical figure seemed unbelievable to many. How could it be that he just shot himself and that was it? But if Hitler wasn't dead, whose remains were found in the crater near the Reich Chancellery? And where did the Führer of the Third Reich vanish to? Potsdam Conference, July 1945. Joseph Stalin and U.S. Secretary of State James Burns are having an informal conversation. Both try to keep a casual tone. Burns asks, "So, is Hitler really done for?" To which Stalin replies, "He didn't die. He escaped. To Spain or Argentina." Burns later mentioned this conversation in his memoirs. He didn't specify whether Stalin was joking or speaking seriously. 7 years later, President Dwight Eisenhower admitted that the U.S. hadn't found reliable evidence of Hitler's death and suggested that the Führer might have indeed escaped from Berlin. Each side kept information from their investigations classified, and where there's uncertainty, There are rumors, speculations, and conspiracy theories. Another argument for conspiracy theorists is the existence of the so-called Ratlins, secret escape routes for Nazis. These routes were organized by the Vatican. Many war criminals managed to escape, thanks to them. For instance, Dr. Death, Ari Berheim, who tortured prisoners at the Mauthausen concentration camp, lived a peaceful life in Cairo under the name Tariq Fard Hussein. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, and Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, fled to South America and lived relatively comfortably there. There are several main conspiracy theories about Hitler's fate, all sharing a common plot. Hitler managed to escape and died far from his homeland, Hitler's double. However, the theories vary widely, from mundane to incredibly bizarre ones. One theory suggests that Hitler escaped, and a body double died in the bunker in his place. This idea was fueled by a strange discovery in the Reich Chancellery Garden, a body with a bullet wound in the forehead, and the recognizable mustache. The deceased was identified as Gustav Weller, who, according to some accounts, actually worked as Hitler's double. Conspiracy theorists suggest that there were several such men with toothbrush mustaches, citing as evidence the book titled The Strange Death of Adolf Hitler. This book, published in the U.S. in 1939 by an anonymous author, supposedly a Nazi officer, claimed that the real Hitler was poisoned back in 1938, and from then on, for doubles were used for various appearances. At the time, the book was dismissed as a silly joke, but when the body double was found in 1945, the story of the burned remains in the shell crater took on a new significance. There are also more exotic theories. The Third Reich in Antarctica, most of which originate from one source. They are often based on a loose interpretation of the book The Morning of the Magicians, published in 1960. The book's author, Jacques Berger, was a member of the French Resistance, a self-taught alchemist with excessively vivid imagination. The Morning of the Magicians is a pseudo-scientific work that claims the Nazis belonged to secret orders and occult organizations where they uncovered ancient mysteries, and that Hitler, being the most esteemed among them, couldn't possibly have died on some stupid couch in a bunker. The tabloid press picked up on this idea and expanded it. One of the most outlandish versions suggested that the Nazis made contact with the inhabitants of Agartha, a land populated by a race of superhumans. According to ancient lore, these superhumans retreated beneath the Earth's surface, and only the worthiest of people could enter their halls. Like Hitler, the laziest of the conspiracy theorists claimed that the entrance to Agartha was right in the bunker, so it was no trouble for Hitler to escape there. More knowledgeable theorists believed that the entrance to Agartha was opened by the Nazis in Antarctica, specifically in New Swabia. Indeed, Nazi Germany had an Antarctic territory named New Swabia, but the mission there was much more mundane: to claim land and establish a whaling base. Back then, whale fat was an important raw material for producing margarine and soap. Admittedly, this is far less exciting than the fantasies about an Arctic citadel, where the Nazis supposedly stored occult artifacts and prepared for the Fourth Reich's rise. One theory claims that Hitler was taken to New Swabia by submarine. As evidence, they cite a supposed quote from the Third Reich's Grand Admiral Karl Donitz. The German submarine fleet is proud to have built an impregnable fortress for the Führer at the other end of the world. The authenticity of this quote, in true conspiracy fashion, esoteric Hitlerism, is highly questionable. Another theory, one of the cornerstones of so-called esoteric Hitlerism, claims that Hitler reached his Arctic base on a flying saucer. If that sounds deranged, it's because it totally is. Esoteric Hitlerism is a sort of New Age religion founded by French writer Savitri Devi and Chilean diplomat Miguel Serrano. They claim that Adolf Hitler was an incarnation of the god Vishnu, and that in 1945 he suffered a temporary defeat, but would return with his fleet of flying saucers to establish Aryan order on Earth. Another theory involving flying saucers suggests that Hitler went to a Nazi moon base. According to some reports, the Nazis indeed had their own flying saucers, experimental disc-shaped aircraft. This idea was supported by Giuseppe Belluzzo, a former member of Mussolini's government, and by some lesser-known German engineers. Escape to the moon base. Moreover, as we know from the Morning of the Magician's book, the Nazi leadership possessed secret knowledge. Therefore, these Nazi flying saucers could have used the magical Vril energy to transport Hitler to the moon base, specifically designed for such purposes. The base is invisible. Through a telescope, it's located on the dark side of the moon. Unfortunately, the first mention of a Nazi moon base was merely a fantasy from one of Robert Heinlein's early short stories. The U.S. space program, which was built by former Nazi engineers, still hasn't succeeded in colonizing the moon. So, we can safely cross that theory off the list of plausible explanations. As time passed after Hitler's supposed death, conspiracy theories started becoming ever more bizarre. However, only one theory deserves serious consideration. Hitler, like many Nazis, might have fled to Argentina and, like many of them, could have lived a long and happy life there. Argentina was very welcoming to Germans, and everything was set up for them to thrive. It's no surprise that after the war, a wave of refugees. Did Hitler escape to Argentina? Headed there, including some high-profile war criminals. Some of them were valuable to Western countries as specialists, while others simply brought large sums of money with them. Argentina's president, Juan Perón, played an active role in welcoming these honored guests. The Soviet Union had evidence of Adolf Hitler's death, which is why the Soviets didn't pursue him. However, the CIA, and especially the FBI, conducted investigations into the most credible reports, and the declassification of documents in recent years has been a delight for conspiracy theorists. One of the earliest known reports is the story of Adolf Hitler. The archival file consists of just one photograph and a brief report from a CIA informant in 1955. The agent had met a former SS officer named Philip Citron, who boasted a miraculous encounter with Hitler himself. Now living in Argentina under the alias Adolf Hitler, the informant didn't believe him, so Citron brought him a photograph. It showed him sitting next to an elderly man with a signature, mustache and hairstyle. On the back of the photo was written the name Adolf Hitler. According to the report, the CIA agent couldn't find any solid leads, and the case was closed. Far more interesting documents reached conspiracy theorists after the FBI declassified their files. In July 1945, an FBI informant reported encountering a man who claimed to be an Argentinian government official. This diplomat said he was one of 4 people who greeted Hitler and his entourage on the Argentine coast. He agreed to tell the whole story in exchange for a guarantee that he wouldn't be extradited to Argentina, where a coup had just taken place. The story goes like this. Just a couple of weeks after the fall of Berlin, 2 submarines arrived in Argentina. On board, there were about 50 people, the elite of the National Socialist Party of Germany. Among them was a man around 55 years old, accompanied by a woman, presumably his wife, and several officials. The man complained that during the voyage, his asthma and stomach ulcer had worsened, a stubble in the shape of the characteristic. Mustache was visible above his upper lip. The informant claimed to have recognized Adolf Hitler. The delegation was seated on horsebacks and sent to the nearest town, the source reported, knowing where Hitler and 2 of his doubles lived, a house in a remote area with a secret door leading to a bunker. The informant promised to reveal more details, but disappeared without a trace, leaving the FBI with only vague descriptions and theories no better than those found in the tabloid press. In his final report to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI agent concluded that Hitler and Eva Braun's escape from Berlin the day before the Russians entered the city couldn't be ruled out. However, in his opinion, Argentina was an unlikely destination. The Führer didn't know any foreign languages, which would have made it difficult for him to avoid attracting attention in South America. The agent considered Switzerland a more likely option. Whether the FBI seriously investigated this possibility is still unknown. The search for traces of Hitler in South America continues to this day and has long since extended beyond Argentina. Now, Brazil, Paraguay, and Chile are also among contenders for Hitler's final hiding place. They'll probably start searching on the moon, too, once they get there.